Hi, Evelyn. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so delighted to have you, especially with so much going on in the astrology. Please share with us what is happening during this June 2023.
Yes. Well, we are out of the eclipse portal for June. We're moving into the new and full moons in the Gemini Sagittarius axis. This month, we have a couple of planetary alignments going on. I will say not as exciting as last month. However, we still have some big shifts to look at and to watch out for.
Yes, please share. I know the big one for me that I keep feeling is Pluto retrograding back into Capricorn.
Yes, that is the big one for sure. And on the day that Pluto retrogrades back into Capricorn, uh, is when Mercury also enters Gemini, and then we have a Venus square Jupiter at the same time. So that there's a lot of shifts going on, which can bring out some information, can bring out some new awarenesses or new lights or an unveiling around information regarding Capricorn systems, authority, government, things like that. So the 11th is going to be, I think, pretty a kind of a fast-paced day in terms of the media and information that's coming out. It might be something that a day where we all have a lot of interest in, what's going on with the government and what sort of new information is being gleaned for us. And then the Venus square Jupiter, that's always the time where we're kind of just reorienting and reassessing our relationship to our things, our stuff,
Mm.
our relationship to our values, money, stuff like that, and how we want to navigate where we are investing our time, investing our money and our resources. So that's
Heart,
also a
right?
day of, I'm sorry, what was that?
So sorry, in our heart, right? Because it's Venus in a Leo, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, squared Jupiter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's the fixed square. Fixed squares are oftentimes the thing that we don't want to have to change, but we know we have to change anyway. So it's going to be something, for a lot of people, it might be in regards to diet or, the things that you do for luxury purposes that you know that you should probably hold off on or
Mm.
not indulge so much in, but it's hard to let go because of comfort reasons or because it just makes us feel good, which is a very Venus Leo thing.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. Oh, that's so interesting. So it wouldn't be a good time to maybe buy some luxurious item or um, what do you think about because I guess I what do you think about like a Venus square Jupiter for doing a beauty treatment or something like that? Would it be a time for that or probably not?
I would prefer not to. It's just like we don't really ever want to do any mega major hair changes or facial reconstruction when Venus is retrograde because you don't want to potentially regret it afterwards or realize that everyone around is under the influence of the Venus retrograde or the Jupiter square Venus. So everyone is feeling the same tension. So then you don't want to get caught up in other people's experiences with their own, you know, personal exploration of Venus square Jupiter. So it's just best to wait or wait a day or two and then see if a feeling has passed, which it probably will. If you really want to buy something big, wait until the day or two after and then see if you still want it,
Right.
which you probably won't, or
It's
you'll feel that you don't need it as much.
okay. So that's great advice. Now, with Capricorn going back in, I mean, Pluto going back into Capricorn, will this bring up sort of the old issues that we were seeing? Just we're already seeing the stuff going on in government where they just finally agreed on the debt ceiling, passing that. Um, I think yesterday, but is it bringing up it's almost what to me feels like they're keeping this thing standing as long as they can. So the financial structure around government feels like, how long can we keep this standing? And they feel like they're going to keep it standing through the last retrograde back into Capricorn and then the last pass through. Is that kind of accurate, or is it something else you're seeing?
Yeah, so Pluto remains retrograde until October. So mid-October, and then it remains in Capricorn until I believe January. And then in November it stations direct on 27 degrees, which is the United States Pluto. So it stations direct and stays put on the United States natal Pluto for like weeks, like a couple of weeks. So there's
Right.
going to be a lot of tension coming to the surface. It's around, yeah, government manipulation, government control, all of the seedy underbelly systems that are in place for just basically control. And we did see back a couple of years ago, I haven't really heard much about it lately, but this whole sort of alt right, extreme fundamental Christian movement in the government that's happening, and how there's a lot of footwork on the ground, or like local government, where there's a lot of push towards this kind of alt right ideology in local government and towns and county government. So I'm wondering if that's also going to come back, because we haven't really heard much about it since Pluto went out of Capricorn. And I think, when we think of Capricorn energy, which is the traditions that are held very, very, very close, and the old ways of doing something, which, the way that this country was founded is, well, through the guise of freedom of religion. However, you know, there's always been a fundamental Christian group that has been wanting to implement their ideology into the government systems. So I think that also might come back.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I feel spirituality is playing and religion is playing a huge part in what's coming up here. Whether it's maybe Saturn being in Pisces, I just see these kind of fundamental religious groups um, almost taking a bigger shape in the world. Like, people are getting scared. They're talking about um, revelations times, those types of things. And so with the fear, it people move in those directions, right? It grows. Um, so it'll be, yeah, I agree. It will be interesting to see. And it's right around election time as well.
yes. Yep. Yes, and we're going to start seeing campaigns for the 2024 election. And so there's going to be a lot of, not always that always is the case, where there's a lot of candidates digging dirt on other candidates and spilling information and uncovering secrets and dark truths. So I think they're going to go pretty hard this year.
Interesting.
Um,
I bet it's gonna be, I mean, from the looks of who's running, it's definitely already setting up to be quite a show.
Yes, for sure. Like espionage, collusion. It's the last hurrah of Pluto and Capricorn. So it's kind of like make or break. This is the last. And when we think of government, like the perception of government officials and the way they think about the future of the country, it's like die or make or break to them. It's like it's now or never. It has to happen, or else all hell breaks loose and and anarchy
I
resumes.
100% agree because I think the we were talking about the divide I think on our last episode, but like the divide is so great that and two sides that are so polarizing, that you can't the middle candidate, which from what I see now, it seems like Robert Kennedy, but then people want to say, oh, he's extreme on this thing and he's, you know, uh, not democratic enough or whatever it is. And it's like, until we understand, we have to see both sides. We have to see both sides, even how no matter how polarizing they can be, it's like you have to start to understand what's really what's really going on. So I hope that even though we're kind of in for quite a show, that more people are ready to come together.
Yes.
It's my hope. I don't know that it'll happen, especially with the way the astrology is going. But, and I think too, it's like that could this have something to do, um, worldwide with what's coming up for war, like the war energy that's coming up as well.
Right, with the nodal ingress into Aries and Libra. So, I think that's definitely gonna be a lot that's definitely gonna be a big topic once the ingress happens. That's probably gonna be a big, rhetoric talking point
Yeah.
is war, military industrial complex, the money that's been spent on war and how it's currently kind of ravaging our economy at this moment, and how the general population is experiencing a decline in their median income. Meanwhile, we're just throwing billions of dollars overseas to fund all of these special interest uh, programs that have nothing to do with the livelihood of United States citizens in this country. And hope, what the hope of Pluto and Capricorn was, or still is, and we can still work towards it, is the restructuring of our foundation. And that's not just the ideological foundation, but it's also literally the concrete that we walk on, like the structure and the infrastructure that the government buildings are in, schools. I just saw an article that said that all these schools in New York are closing because the infrastructure doesn't support the the well-being of students during the because of the climate change. And so we have, you know, we literally cannot function. We cannot function on a day-to-day basis comfortably. And so I think there's still some time for Pluto to do that work, and there may be some unfortunate situations where it's like kind of forced upon us to change. You know, I don't want to like I don't want to like predict anything into existence or like,
Yeah.
think anything into existence, but when it comes to like structural collapses,
Yes.
and bridges, buildings, things like that, where it's like, oh yeah, we really do need funding to literally rebuild Pluto and Capricorn, the structures that we need to exist and to run efficiently.
Well, and it makes sense too with that Uranus and Taurus, which is the same that it brings that same fear of everything's kind of crumbling, right? That's like, oh well, this is the earth and
Yes.
that's kind of crumbling. It's also around money, but we're coming to that degree where Uranus is moving past that 20 degree, which is the same time frame as World War II when that really
Hmm.
started to take shape and power, right? So it's
Yes.
thinking about what is this? What's really going on that it's almost like we're getting into something when we don't really know we're getting into it, meaning the American people, where I feel
Yeah.
like um, I don't know if even awareness would change that from happening, but that's what it starts. That's what it's
Yeah.
looking like.
Yeah, and also based off of what you're saying, on the 26th this month, Mars and Uranus will be square.
Mm.
And as we all know, I think, well, we don't all know, but Mars, the planet of war, passion, fight, that external expression of aggression, in making a tense contact to Uranus, which is unexpected, monumental, chaotic change. There is potential for, aggressive energy that, on a global scale, there could be, you know, um, explosive energy when we have Mars and Uranus connections. Unfortunately, and with Uranus and Taurus, it's a fixed square again. So, whenever again we have fixed squares, it's even more intense because of the fact that the fixed signs won't ever do anything unless it's absolutely necessary. 100% the last straw.
Yeah.
So, when you have Mars square Uranus, it's going to be oftentimes a universal shift or like an energetic shift from the universe
Okay.
that is forcing the change.
Okay. So would it be nuclear energy, like that kind of thing, or would
Well,
it
it could
like
be like environmental, it could be big shifts and changes in the environment, um, where it's, the it might be like heat, electrical, storms. Um, Uranus is associated with electricity and the connectivity of, the internet too, and like
right?
the connectivity of all people. So when Mars comes in, there's kind of a force of changing that connection. So there could be power outages, for instance, or just like electrical storms, things like that, that kind of force us to see, oh, maybe our infrastructure needs to be
Right.
updated or upgraded. And then not in such a negative way, in a positive way, Mars square Uranus can inspire innovation
Okay.
and change and ingenuity. So through these kind of destructive um, experiences, we learn to create new pathways and options out of a necessity for better infrastructure. So, on a personal level, a Mars square Uranus could be that maybe you finally take the initiative to change your relationship to your social media.
Oh,
For instance,
interesting. Okay.
it could be
Yeah.
so simple on the individual scale where you just simply feel a need to change the way that you engage with community or the way that you engage with your friend group, for instance. Maybe you actually, like, maybe for shy people, they feel this need to go out of their way to create connection or bridge gaps between them and other people. Could also be um, the need to disconnect as well from groups of people.
What degree is that at? Is Mars will be in Leo and Uranus in Taurus. So Taurus at 20 and Mars at
Yeah,
20.
it'll be 21:30. So yes. Yeah, so what you were saying about the 20th degree.
That's okay. That's
Mhm.
I'm for my own personal side. Because Mars has actually been my Mars is Leo 18, so Uranus has been squaring it for quite some time. It's been going back and forth. So I kind of know what that's been for
Mm,
me. But so everybody's going to get to have part of that experience. And then depending upon where that placement lies, looking at the sudden changes that could happen in those house system. Mine just happened to be my fourth house to my seventh house, and it represented stuff changing within my family. So within the males in my family, so
okay.
kind of warned that something could happen, whether it's my brothers or my uncles or any of that, and it did. My brothers got into a horrible, horrible, violent fight, and my uncle lost his foot. Like, there was
What?
yes, yes, like, these very
Oh my
unexpected,
gosh.
weird, totally you couldn't predict this type of stuff happened. Um, so just so when I'm saying this, I'm not trying to scare anyone, but just maybe look at where this placement lies. It's only going to be a day or two because Mars moves fast, but Mars is going retro. No, Venus is going retrograde in Leo, so it's just one pass of it. Correct. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
mine lasted a really long time because it's Uranus hitting. It was Uranus hitting my Mars instead of it being like a passing Mars hitting my Uranus.
Yeah, yeah, and that's Uranus is very slow, so it's been hovering for a good year
Yeah,
in one area for a lot of people.
yeah. So that it
Mhm.
yeah, so it had time to do to do a lot of a lot of chaotic things. But just take notice. I think another thing would be like just be aware of your surroundings as well. Just because there the situations could start that people get wrapped up in that could be violent situations that maybe would be best to avoid. So
100%. Yeah. And then it's always great to remember that we are a part of an ecosystem where everyone is also being affected. So, there's days where I'm like driving and I get cut off like 10 times in a row. I'm like, what is going on? And I look at the transits. I'm like, oh, it's like Sun square Mars or something. I'm like, oh, everyone is just like being super aggro today. And so remember that wherever you go, everyone's under the same influence of Mars square Uranus on the 26th. So even though you may be a peace loving, gentle soul, like we're all susceptible to having that kind of like irritation or agitation build up on that day and then react maybe unexpectedly that we don't normally react and just get triggered in various ways. So everyone can potentially do that. And that's not to say stay home, don't go anywhere, but just be, yeah, like you say, be
aware.
more vigilant.
We were in uh a parking lot in Calabasas, which I know most people who know Calabasas is very like chill, calm. The people are kind of I don't know, a little snooty maybe, but not a lot going on there. And we saw two fights in the parking lot between the time we went to dinner and the time we came out. And so and looking at it was it was a Mars, it was like Mars opposing Pluto. I think it was Mars opposing Pluto. So it was pretty recent.
Wow.
Yes. And like, yep, that's exactly what's going on. So during those intense Mars transits, just be aware of what, your surroundings and what's going on. And just, drive the other way. That's, just don't get involved.
Yeah, or laugh at it and say, oh, how silly they are under the influence of the cosmos and
Right.
are allowing the planets to control them.
Yes. Yes. And okay, so when is that the June 26th?
Yes, it is. So, yeah, June 26th, so towards the end of the month. And let's see, there's a few things. There's also Saturn going retrograde too
When does
this
that
month. So that's on the 17th.
okay.
That's also the time of the new moon.
Okay.
So on the new moon on June 17th, the Saturn goes retrograde. That's also a pretty heavy day too. Um, but not so heavy in terms of, emotionally heavy. It's just more in terms of so much kind of information to think about and sit with. So there might be just a lot of data coming in for us to sit with, think about, analyze, understand, not necessarily make any decisions or any moves in any which way, but just allow the information to settle in the body and feel how, just what it feels like for you. The new moons are always times where we tend to feel a little less, outgoing, a bit more introverted anyway. It's a time when the sun and the moon are in the same sign. So it's going to be at 26 degrees Gemini. And then it's also going to be square Neptune. I can share my screen and
Yeah.
show
So that's gonna be
you.
really interesting. Anything square Neptune, I've learned, or opposing Neptune, um, it really can cause confusion. I mean, I've been dealing with so many Neptune squares over the past few years that I feel like it's
Hmm.
confusing.
Hmm.
Okay, so
So
this
here's the Neptune squaring the new moon, and it's pretty potent because it's an applying aspect. So the new moon is at 26 degrees, Neptune's at 27. So the when planets are applying to a degree, so on my chart, it shows applying aspects as solid lines and then separating aspects as dotted lines. So you can see which aspects are more potent and which ones are waning. So it's basically just a waxing versus a waning energy. And as we know, waxing energy is building. So you can feel the anticipation or the tension building, and you can feel it. You don't necessarily know exactly what it is, but you can just tell that something is occurring. I remember one of my teachers explained it really well. I love how they explain it, so I use it all the time. An applying aspect,
Mhm.
let's say for instance, just an applying aspect. So when let the sun and moon are moving into this perfect square with Neptune, it's as if you are sitting on the third floor apartment and you could see someone coming up to the door. And then when it hits the exact degree is when they ring the doorbell. And then when it starts to separate is when you realize who it is.
Okay, that's interesting.
So you can see it, you don't exactly know what's going to happen, but then the thing happens, the impact, the exact aspect happens, and then the realization comes afterwards.
That makes
So with the new moon, we're just going to have to sit and wait a little bit and let the realizations fall through, maybe through dreams. I would be pay a lot of attention to your dreams that night or the previous night as well to feel kind of what's coming in symbolically. Because especially when you've got Pisces, Neptune, Gemini, Mercury and Gemini, all of these mental images and pictures come into existence. They don't necessarily make a lot of sense, but it's very symbolic. So
mm,
there's going to be a lot of, archetypal symbolic language going around. And those symbols may not necessarily make sense until you have all the facts and all the details. So the new moon is just a time to sit and listen and receive, which is also very Neptunian too. So just be in receptivity.
fine. And then that's right when Saturn goes retrograde. What is it going retrograde?
Yeah.
What degree?
It's at 7 degrees.
And then it moves back to, do you know what it moves back?
So it's in Pisces. It's going to move back into, let me see.
Does it go into Aquarius?
It will, let me check really quick. It will go, actually, no, I'm sorry. It will station direct at 0 degrees Pisces.
Okay.
So we're completely done with Saturn and Aquarius. This is full on Saturn Pisces. And when Saturn retrogrades backwards, in general, Saturn retrograde is all about the restructuring of anything just in general terms. So whatever kind of projects you're working on, wherever Saturn falls in your chart, For instance, let's say it's in your fourth house of home and family, it's going to be the time to go back and reassess and restructure the systems or processes in which you engage with your family. Maybe you need to reset some new boundaries with family. Um, and when it's in the sign of Pisces, which is the unconscious mind, our relationship to divinity and to the divine unconscious, then it's restructuring our relationship to the subtle unconscious processes in which our mind is working off of. So this is the subconscious mind, which is being restructured. So, really great for psychoanalysis, really great for depth psychology, really great for doing deep dives into your unconscious realms, doing dream analysis, even doing some hallucinogenic journeying as well. Things where you go deep into the recesses of your inner landscape so that you can just parse through, sift through any of the buildup or residue that is just kind of blocking the flow,
Right.
and then snipping it out so that you can feel more comfortable with your spiritual expression.
That's so interesting because, yeah, because Saturn being in Pisces, right, is more about the spiritual side of the structure, right? The structure.
Yeah, yeah. And Saturn and Pisces can bring us some awarenesses to our tendencies to being depressed too.
Mm,
So the last the last infamous Saturn Pisces era was the early 90s, which was kind of like a nihilist time, or just like the um uh we think of like grunge era, where it was just kind of like,
yes.
we just
Gosh, yes. I mean, that was the most, for me, it was the most prominent just based on my age, but Nirvana and Soundgarden, all of it, it all shaped so much of that our culture, but who I was as a teenager. And
yeah.
and you feel it. You just there's nothing about that time that you don't feel the kind of underbelly of sadness or or not, and it's like melancholy. It's like very
Yes.
melancholy, and all the music was very melancholy, but so good. So it was,
Which I
yeah.
think Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholia
Mm.
came out, or Melancholy, sorry, Melancholy. Or I'm mixing up like five different movies and albums right now, but the Smashing Pumpkins
Just
album
go
came out.
back and watch Reality Bites, or there was another one I watched the other day too, Empire Records, and it brings you right back into exactly what that time was,
Yeah.
Empire Records, it was Liv Tyler and, a couple of other people that are still pretty well known, and it was just such one of them had, like, a drug addiction, one of them was gambling, one was addicted to sex, like, the whole one was cutting herself. I mean, everyone had some issue, and I was watching
Hmm.
it, I just thought, "This is so funny." We were so it's not even that it's funny because it's so real, but it's every teenager, everybody in that movie had, like, this horrible thing that they were going through, and it was all what it was all about, and so I just thought that is such a sign of, yeah, Saturn and Pisces, what was really happening during that time.
Mhm. Yeah, like the disillusionment and yeah, like the melancholia of the era of like the apathy as well.
Apathy, and it was like such teenage energy, if you think of it, and I don't know if that has anything to do with Saturn in Pisces, but it was that teenage trying to find yourself, and everything was like
The
You
angst.
yes, like an angst story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Really
Which Saturn and Pisces can do, and whenever Saturn goes through the 12th house is often a time of having to navigate um, that process of disconnection from source, or that's what I that's a really fluffy way that I just call depression is just like the disconnection of everything, of feeling disconnected from life, of growth, of the source of energy of life and the flow,
Mhm.
where it feels like you have to swim through and wade through the murkiness of the depths of your unconscious in order to find your way back to the
Yeah,
purpose or the reason, what it's all meant for. And Saturn depresses wherever it is, and so and can create strong boundaries wherever it is. So Saturn in Pisces is that yeah that yeah sense of apathy towards divinity, or maybe a bit of cynicism towards God, a bit of like questioning, or you know, skepticism around spirituality. So,
which is interesting because I think people are really they've been diving into spirituality so much, and I have a feeling it has because Neptune's there, right? I f
yeah.
back in the '90s, Neptune was not there, and so it was a totally different feeling. It was there is no God. There is, this kind of, um, like, who what does it really matter? Um, it's all kind of bullshit. So now I think with Neptune being there, there's almost like this deep understanding that there's this greater thing or a greater feeling or a deeper meaning. And then that Saturn comes in and is like, how do we really make that into our reality? How do we bring that into our reality in a
Hmm.
way without totally losing our minds in sadness? Because Moon on Saturn, we just had that not too long ago. We had that transit, and I was like that day. I was so just down, just like really depressed. And natally, this was hitting my second house, so it really shouldn't have done much. In my thought, it shouldn't have done much, but I really felt it. And so I think that paying attention to where Saturn is in your chart, especially being in Pisces, your mental health and your mental stability, it's really important. And then with all that Gemini, I mean, it makes me
Hmm.
even more concerned to see that. But um, yeah, mental health being a big issue.
Yeah.
Feel like confused or am I going crazy or not being able to sleep or things like that.
Definitely. Definitely.
Interesting.
Um,
Do we have the there was one more question. I know Venus goes retrograde. When is that happening in June?
well, Venus enters Leo in, let's see, get my notes. Venus enters Leo on the 5th. So Venus enters Leo on the 5th, and she does not turn retrograde this month.
Okay, so it's next month.
Yes. Let's see, turns retrograde on the 22nd of July. So we've got some time with Venus entering Leo. So then Venus and Mars will both be in Leo from the 5th on.
Right.
And when they're both in Leo, I don't know, this is a fun time.
We just got to get past that opposition of Pluto, right? That's happening on the 5th, right? I would say Venus op Pluto.
the Right, yeah, so, yes, because Pluto will be at,
0 to
let me check, yes. Doo-doo-doo. Um, let's see, she actually opposes, yep, exactly on the 5th at 0 degrees, so it'll be Pluto at 0, Venus at 0, again, a fixed
yeah. That's an intense one.
opposition.
I just wanna just flag everybody that it's with what I saw with Mars opposed Pluto, I'm like, okay, this I'm even though Venus is more benefactory, what did they call it?
And
Like a
she's a benefic.
benefic, yes. But
Mhm.
you got that Pluto energy there. So I'm
Yeah, and then oppositions are always a matter of having to make a decision or a choice.
okay.
And so it's a matter of the choice of the heart versus um, breaking away or letting something die.
Mm,
So it's a pretty intense one. Pluto's been squaring my Venus for too long.
my gosh.
And
Are you
so
0
Venus,
degree? 0 degree Taurus or
Pluto, so 28 degrees. Venus is at, my Venus is at 28 degrees Libra. And so when it's going to retrograde back over and then station and then direct go back
back to
again.
I know that it's that 28th degree. That's where my south node is in Capricorn. So
Oh,
what's interesting is you're just saying that, and I'm like, "Oh, so my Venus your Venus squares my that means we probably knew each to me, it was like, that's my 12th house, so we probably knew each other."
at some point. Yeah. Yeah. So Pluto Venus connections are, it's always an intense time for relationships and for love and connectivity. So it can feel like all of the things that are an issue come up to surface during that time to be worked on. And it doesn't mean it has to be dreadful or horrendous. It's our own perceptions with how we navigate those types of situations. If you're somebody who prefers to be on the lighter side, surface level, not really get into deep conversations, it's going to be tough for you. If you're somebody who is kind of used to getting into the trenches, like wanting to talk about problems or problem solve, find solutions, things like that. Or not just find solutions, but just like get into the trenches of feelings and
Yeah.
how is this relationship going? How are we doing? What are you think, like relationship check-ins? It might be just another day.
It's the deep could be a deep conversation day.
A deep conversation day. Yeah,
Also,
but with it,
keep note of finances too. It's like Venus transits, even though it's like a lot of times it's relationships, a lot of times it can also be something like where you don't want to blow up your finances because you want to, especially with it being a Pluto thing. You like, oh, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore, and like blowing the whole thing up. Um,
mhm.
there could be a little bit of that energy as well.
Mhm. Yeah. I think when it comes to Leo, with Venus in Leo, it tends to brighten the energy a little bit, and it becomes more about how you are getting the love that you crave and the love that you desire. And with oppositions, there are also projections. So we can see how we're projecting our need for love onto people around us,
Mhm.
maybe rather than just being an expression of that love that we want to the people around us. So just noticing how you are maybe craving or desiring or wanting affection and what you're doing proactively to attain that for yourself and how it's coming up. Is it coming up in a tense way? Is it coming up in a resentful way? Guilt, shame, which are all Pluto terms. Are you doing things to get that in ways that would elicit shame or guilt?
Mhm.
Or are you doing it in a way that makes people feel good, which is Venus Leo, right? Coming from a higher octave of Leo, which is, well, I want to feel good, and it makes me feel good to make other people feel good. So therefore, I want to share my goodness with others
Right.
so that we can all be a part of this. Um,
Well, I mean, I love the idea too, where that you were starting to talk about of that Venus coming into Leo with Mars being there and it being a more fun time. So
yeah,
I want to digress from talking about that by the Pluto opposition, but like what does that? I mean, it feels like a very summertime vibe with
yeah.
those two.
Oh, for sure. Fun, seeking pleasure, competitiveness with Mars and Leo, the need to be seen, the need to be experienced, or just also experience pleasurable things and sharing activities with friends. It's yeah, playing games, cracking jokes, being more on the lighter side, which is everything Leo loves. And so all of the planets that go through Leo have to meet Pluto first, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to go through the trenches first, and then things lighten up later or afterwards.
You have to get over the hard, like, horrible bump to get to the
Yes. So
right.
sometimes that's better that way. You go on, let's say you're going on vacation with friends and you're driving to Palm Springs, and on the drive there, you're like, by the way, you know, I have something that I need to talk to you about. I just want to
Do
get
it
it out of the way.
do it then before you get there, and then you can have a good time. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
But
that's a good memo. I like that. I know, and then Venus doesn't actually meet Mars, my understanding it's like it trails behind it, because then by the time it goes retrograde, Mars is already I think will be in Virgo, but that'll be next month, and we can review that then. Um,
mhm.
it's an exciting I mean, it's exciting, but I am a little nervous about that Pluto going back over my south node for the last time, or that back into Capricorn and kind of what we're
Yeah.
so but
But it'll be the third pass for all of us
so tell
at
us
the 28th
about the
degree.
third pass. When something does that 3 times, is the energy dispersed?
It's more, yeah, it's not as intense as the first time or the second time, because we have a better understanding of what it is. It's like the law of threes, right? When the first thing that comes up is the intensity of the realization of something. And then the second time, it's learning the lesson of that thing and then changing your behavior patterns for the future. And then the third time is like okay, have you learned the lesson yet?
Right,
And
okay,
are you going to
okay.
change your perception, or have you gone through the process of changing your perception around this thing or the situation so that you can navigate it with a cool, calm, um, you know, loving, compassionate, empathetic nature.
Um,
Hmm.
but I mean,
So, yeah,
it does feel that makes it feel a little lighter for sure, so
yeah, the third pass is usually like the thing has already happened
mm,
by the third time. It's usually like it comes back and you're like, oh, yeah, this again,
right,
of course.
right, okay, okay.
Mhm. And that's with the slower moving planets, so the transpersonal planets, which are Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, because they do move so slow. It's usually larger, bigger life changes that they kick up or they trigger for us. For some people, it is, every single time it is like something major shifts or something major changes to get them to the other side of transformation. But yeah, whenever the retrograde happens, so I guess just to reiterate, just to make sure we're all clear, is that when a planet goes, it's moving along its path, it hits a point in our chart, it retrogrades back, that's the second point, and then it goes over, and then it's not common that it'll retrograde again, but sometimes that does happen.
Yeah. I know it's usually
Mhm,
just the 2 passes or
mhm,
the retrograde pass. So this is
mhm.
weird, right? It's not like a normal thing to have it do it 3 times.
3 is normal, but this one, especially for the United States chart, because it stations retrograde or it stations direct on that
Interesting.
point, then it's like doubly as intense because it's really honing in on what the what is being brought up, what is being unveiled through, yeah, Pluto and Capricorn. But mhm.
Well, we'll have to check in, next month and see how we're all doing.
Yeah, yeah. But I think at this point, when it comes to the United States Pluto, what's been going on there,
Mhm.
it's interesting. It's really cool to watch for me to see the awareness, the process of awareness, and then the process of adoption of that awareness into language and rhetoric and discussion
Right?
amongst people who like never would think about anything about like global changes, the change in the United States, like the collapse of basically the United States dream or the American dream and what have you. And then just watching people change the way that they're seeing how the government functions and how media functions. And before everyone was getting caught up in all the drama and all the rhetoric.
Yeah.
And now it feels like when I read comments and, you know, just, on Reddit or Twitter or wherever and see that no, it seems like a lot of people are very aware. A lot of people are very aware of
Really?
like, oh, I
Yeah.
can't trust anything. Can't trust anything that they say. I don't believe anything that they say. It's hard to believe anything that comes out. So I'll just have to wait basically until like
You can see the truth.
released
Yeah.
documents are revealed, which is like
Right.
the Pluto process.
It is the Pluto process, so that's great to hear. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I think also we've been under kind of a spell for such a long time with media and with you know, what was going on in government and the propaganda. There even though we live in America, I think propaganda's been happening all along. It's just we're so used to it or we're so not aware of what's really happening that we go along with narratives all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great. That's great to hear. I
Yeah.
think, if we could get someone in power or not in power, but like some change in government where there's less of that happening on any level would be amazing. Like, now that's the feat, right? It's like that's the feat. Or does the whole thing collapse and we get rid of government completely? I just don't see how that could actually happen, but I also don't spend much time thinking about it. So probably a good,
Probably.
yeah.
Yeah, with Saturn and Pisces, I think I'm definitely riding a little bit of that apathetic wave
Are
in
you?
a
Yeah.
good way, in a good way, like in a disconnecting from the world's problems kind of a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. in order to not have it affect me in an emotional way, because that, yeah, can just lead down a path of nihilism.
Sure, for sure. So that's like, okay, well, that's a good thing to end it on. Don't work yourself up too much with what's being projected out into the ether right now. Just it's almost like focus on the internal and focus on your mental health and your mental thinking ability where we can start to
100%.
really connect mind, heart, and soul, where we understand when we feel something, and then that triggers a thought in our brain instead of it being triggered by something externally.
100%. Yeah. And then having the choice
Yeah,
to allow that external thing, to influence how we feel or think in the moment.
right. And then that's because that's when you're controlled and you don't even realize that sometimes, but that's when it's an easy way to
Yeah.
make somebody do something. So, so much to digest.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yes.
so much, Evelyn. That was wonderful. Absolutely
Yeah, thanks for having me.
anytime. And yeah, we'll have you back to do our July forecast. So thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me again, and have a great new and full moon this month.
You too. You too. I will see you soon.
All right. Bye.